Okay, welcome back. In this video, we'll cover Chapter 14, the Digestive System and Body Metabolism. First, the formal definition for digestion. This is the mechanical and chemical breakdown of food into forms that your cells can absorb and use. So it's not only the breaking down the food chemically through various enzymes, but also mechanically breaking it down, turning a big piece of apple into smaller bits of apple. Now, the whole system consists of a very, very long open tube called the alimentary canal. This extends all the way from the mouth down through the esophagus to the stomach and through the intestines. That's all one big open space. So you have the alimentary canal plus all the accessory organs that will empty secretions into that canal. Right, and here's a general overview of the entire system. Start with the alimentary canal, mouth, and the esophagus, down to the stomach, the small intestine, large intestine, and then to the rectum, and then out of the anus. That's all one continuous long open tube. And then accessory organs, salivary glands, help to start the breakdown process in the mouth, here and here, here, and liver, and the gall bladder, and the pancreas. Alright, this is to show you how long the alimentary canal actually is. Here's an image with all the lengths represented. The distance from the tongue to the stomach is about half of a meter, so it's about 1.5 feet. The length of the small intestine here is between 5 to 6 meters. That's about 21 feet in length. And the length of the large intestine here is about 1.5 meters, which is about 6 feet long. So an incredible length of tissue all crammed into your abdomen. Alright, we'll start with the mouth and tongue and work our way further along the alimentary canal. Of course, the mouth, this is where digestion actually begins. It doesn't start in the stomach or the intestines. Digestion, the process, actually starts within the mouth, both by breaking up food into smaller bits, so you're breaking it down mechanically, and by also adding saliva to that mix of smaller bits of food. And that process is called mastication, whenever you're adding saliva to the food that you're chewing. Of course, next is the tongue, the muscular organ that helps move food towards the pharynx whenever you're swallowing. This is what is needed to help close off the epiglottis so food doesn't go down into your trachea and down into your lungs. This will help kind of guide food, whatever you swallow, down through the esophagus and onto the stomach. Alright, teeth. The teeth are the hardest structures found in the body, and these are not considered part of the skeletal system due to a completely different structural makeup compared to bone. That's why teeth weren't mentioned when we talked about the skeletal system. They belong in this chapter in the digestive system. And we have two sets of teeth as we age. The first set of teeth, the baby teeth, also called the primary teeth or deciduous teeth. You have 20 of those. Remember, primary always means first. So your first set of teeth. So baby will start to have 20 of those. And as we get older, those fall out. Then we get our secondary teeth or our permanent teeth, also known as the adult teeth. And then we'll have 32 of those. Primary are the baby teeth, the first set that we get. We only have 20 of those. Then the adult teeth, the secondary teeth, you have 32 of those. Right, we'll talk about the pharynx and the esophagus. Pharynx, like we mentioned in the respiratory system chapter, is the cavity just behind or just posterior to the mouth, from which the esophagus will lead down to the stomach. Now, neither the pharynx nor the esophagus digests any food. All they are passageways between the mouth and onto the stomach. So the esophagus doesn't digest anything. It just helps get the food that you just swallowed from your throat into your stomach. And the esophagus, this is a straight collapsible tube that propels food from the pharynx that you just swallowed onto the stomach. And this is going to be different compared to the trachea. The trachea is a tube that's always held open by those rings of cartilage, but the esophagus is collapsed. It only will expand open as a mass of food is propelling down through it. Alright, the esophagus will meet the stomach at a circular muscle called the cardiac sphincter. Sometimes this is called the lower esophageal sphincter. They reference the same thing. So cardiac sphincter or lower esophageal sphincter are the same structure. Now, the cardiac sphincter is used to prevent material from going back into the esophagus out from the stomach. So if you were to eat lunch and then for some reason stand on your head, the reason why the food stays in your stomach and not coming all the way back out is due to this sphincter. Right, here's a general image of the stomach and the esophagus. The esophagus would continue from up here down here, and where it joins the stomach is this circular muscle right here, the cardiac sphincter. And normally this will be sealed closed unless it's forced open by food that has been swallowed. So that will be cinched closed, so material that's in here doesn't go back out that way. Alright, next we'll talk about the stomach. This is a pouch-like organ that's about 25 to 30 centimeters long. It has multiple functions. The first, it receives food from the esophagus. It will mix that food with a substance called gastric juice. We'll talk about what that is here in a few minutes. Alright, it will begin the digestion of proteins. And lastly, it will move the food onto the first part of the small intestine. Alright, the stomach has various parts with different functions. The first part, the cardia, this is a small area near the esophageal opening, near the cardiac sphincter. That's why it's called the cardia, because it's fairly close to the heart. The fundus is a temporary storage area that's just above that cardia. The main portion of the stomach is called the body, and then the pylorus is the opening to the, it will lead to the opening to the small intestine. This will be at the very end of the pouch of the stomach. The rugae, these are also called gastric folds. These are creases within the stomach that help the stomach to expand and fill with material. The last part here, the pyloric sphincter. All sphincters are going to be circular muscles that will be used to close things off from other material. This is a muscle that will control the emptying of the stomach into the small intestine. This has to be regulated pretty tightly. You don't want all the material in your stomach to enter the small intestine all at once. This has to be regulated by various hormones and various enzymes. Right, here's a more detailed image of the stomach. Of course, the esophagus here. The cardiac sphincter, or the lower esophageal sphincter, same thing, right here. The cardia, this first area of the stomach. Just above that, the fundus. The main portion of the stomach is the body, here. If you look at these, they literally look like wrinkles or creases within the stomach lining. Those are the rugae, or the gastric folds. See, the pylorus is the last part here. And at the very end, the part that controls what leaves the stomach and enters the first part of the small intestine is the pyloric sphincter here. And this will be the first part of the small intestine, the duodenum. Right, next we'll talk about the various gastric secretions. The inner lining of the stomach has multiple gastric glands that contain 3 different types of cells that secrete something. And all these are very important in order for your stomach to work properly. The first one, mucus cells. Like the name implies, they produce mucus. This provides a very thick layer of mucus, which is used as a protective layer to the stomach's inner surface. The parietal cells, these are what will produce hydrochloric acid, which provides a very acidic environment of the stomach. The pH in your stomach is roughly around 1 to 2, which is incredibly strong. This could actually burn your skin if it were to touch you. So because it is so harsh of an environment, the lining of the stomach needs to be protected by this thick layer of mucus. And when that lining doesn't get as thick as it should be, and the hydrochloric acid is able to contact the innermost lining of the stomach, that's when you get a stomach ulcer. Right, and the third type of secretory cells, the chief cells. These will produce an enzyme that is inactive, and the inactive form is called pepsinogen. Now when this is mixed with hydrochloric acid, it becomes active. And the active form is called pepsin, and this will help to break down proteins. And this is the most important gastric enzyme that we'll talk about, is pepsin. So adding up all these secretions that we just talked about, the mucus from the mucus cells, the hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells, and the pepsin from the chief cells, all of that together collectively is known as the gastric juice. Here's a silhouette of the stomach here. We'll zoom in on this one section here. You see the various folds and rugae here. Mucus cells will be up here, parietal cells here, chief cells down here, and we won't talk about these multiple layers below here. Alright, next we'll talk about gastric absorption. So even though the gastric enzymes will begin the breakdown of proteins, because the stomach is such a harsh environment, it is not well adapted to absorb anything that is digested. You can think of this as really just a cement mixer. All it does is churn material that you've swallowed, add some gastric juice to it to break it down, and then move it on to the next part of the system. Right, and after being exposed to all that gastric juice, the food that you have eaten is now turned into a semi-fluid paste called chyme. Now this is the material that will enter the small intestine. And if you've ever had a stomach virus or have had diarrhea before, what comes out is actually chyme. So it's not the food that you ate, it's not really feces yet either. It is that kind of midway point. So that's what the semi-fluid paste looks like. That's what chyme is. Alright, next we'll talk about the pancreas. Like we mentioned before in the chapter on the endocrine system, the pancreas has both a exocrine function and endocrine function. Okay, for this chapter, we'll focus on the exocrine function of the pancreas. And the exocrine function of the pancreas is to secrete a digestive juice called pancreatic juice. Now, this pancreatic juice is produced in very specialized cells found within the pancreas called acini. These form little clusters that run along the entire length of the pancreas. These acini will secrete small amounts of pancreatic juice into smaller tubes, and those smaller tubes will merge to form larger and larger tubes. And this will eventually give rise to what's called the pancreatic duct. Now, the pancreatic duct will run the entire length of the pancreas and actually will connect to the small intestine. Here's the stomach here. Here's the pancreas kind of cut open and peeled back so you can see inside. These things here look like almost like paw prints. Will be the islets of Langerhans that will produce hormones. Remember, that's where you'll find the alpha, beta, and delta cells. But for this chapter, we'll focus on these exocrine functions. These are the acini. Each one of these will secrete a small bit of pancreatic juice into this little tube, and it will merge to this very long tube that runs all the way down the length of the pancreas. And it will eventually dump all that material into the small intestine. Now, pancreatic juice is going to be will have a very high concentration of bicarbonate ions. And the whole purpose of bicarbonate ion is to raise the pH of chyme as it enters the small intestine. Remember, the stomach is a very acidic environment. The pH is around 1 to 2. You can't have something that acidic, that strong of an acid, contacting living tissue. It would damage the small intestine and it would burn right through it very quickly. So you need a way to buffer that. You need to find a way to neutralize such a strong acid. The way you do that is you add bicarbonate ions to that. Bicarbonate ion is a very strong base. So mixing the very low pH, the strong acids of the stomach, mixing that with the high pH of the bicarbonate ion helps neutralize that content so your stomach, or so your small intestine, is able to handle that material much more easily. Alright, next we'll talk about the regulation of the pancreatic secretion. There are hormones that will help regulate the release of this pancreatic juice. Here are a few that we'll talk about. The first one, secretin. This will stimulate the pancreas to release the pancreatic juice that is high in bicarbonate ions. Second one, I just put the acronym here, CCK. The full name is cholecystokinin. This will stimulate the gall bladder to release the bile that's stored within the gall bladder. And here's a flowchart on how this works. You have the very acidic chyme that enters the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, here. A special lining of the small intestine will release secretin into the bloodstream. Step 2. The secretin will stimulate the pancreas to secrete bicarbonate ions. So the pancreatic juice is released by the pancreas, containing all the bicarbonate ion. And then that bicarbonate ion will be dumped inside the small intestine to neutralize that very acidic chyme. So this bicarbonate ion and pancreatic juice isn't released until it detects the presence of the acidic chyme in the first part of the small intestine. Alright, next we'll talk about the liver. This is our largest internal organ that we have. The largest organ in general is our skin, but the largest internal organ is the liver, and it's just below the diaphragm. Now, something very unique about the liver, it contains an unusual circulation system called the portal system. This is where you have the portal vein carrying blood from the veins of the intestines to the liver. So what's happening here is blood that is returning from the intestines, instead of going back to the heart first, will go to the liver first to be filtered once again, and then go back on to the inferior vena cava and onto the heart. So this is unique for just the liver only. Here's an image of the liver, both this view and then also the inferior view. It has 2 lobes here. See where it connects to the inferior vena cava up here. You see the hepatic duct, hepatic artery, hepatic portal vein, they're all part of that system here. So again, we'll go from the bottom to the top here. Once the small intestine will absorb the products that it needs for digestion, the blood that is left over will go through the hepatic portal vein to the liver. The liver will filter that blood once again, and then whatever is left over after that will continue on through the hepatic vein onto the inferior vena cava. So this is only affecting blood coming back from the intestines before it gets to the heart and makes a stop off on the liver first, and then goes on to the heart. Now we'll talk about some functions of the liver. It'd be very difficult to name all the functions of the liver because it does so many things. Here are just a few that we'll go over. It will produce glycogen from glucose. Whenever you eat food, glucose, remember, is a sugar. So some of that glucose is stored away for later use in a form called glycogen. So the liver will turn that glucose into that stored form of glycogen and can also break down that glycogen back into glucose to be used. It will help phagocytize the worn out red blood cells and any other foreign substances. And of course it will remove toxins from the blood such as alcohol and drugs. Alright, next we'll talk about bile. Bile is a yellowish green colored liquid that the liver cells make constantly. It will contain water and bile salts and bile pigments, cholesterol, and electrolytes. And excessive secretion of these bile pigments produce what's called jaundice. This is where you have a yellowish coloring to the eyes and the skin and the mucous membranes. This is a good sign that the liver is starting to fail. Alright, functions of bile. The bile salts that are found within the bile are helpful in breaking down fat into droplets that the cells can use. And this process is called emulsification. So these bile salts will help break down the fatty acids into literally just small droplets of fat. And so this will help the cells be able to absorb fatty acids and absorb cholesterol. Alright, the gallbladder. The gallbladder is where bile is stored. Even though it's made by the liver, it's stored in the gallbladder until it's needed to be used later on. And the gallbladder will only secrete bile into the small intestine once it's stimulated by CCK. If it's not stimulated by this hormone, it will just sit there until it is. Alright, here's another flowchart explaining that. You have that acidic chyme with fat entering the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine here. A certain layer of the intestinal wall will secrete CCK into the bloodstream. That CCK will stimulate the gallbladders, the walls of the gallbladder to contract, and then to inject bile. That bile passes down the cystic duct into the duodenum, and then from there that bile will help break down fat. So CCK is only secreted by the gallbladder once the presence of fats are detected in the duodenum. If fats aren't detected here, then they won't be broken down, and CCK will be introduced into the small intestine. Alright, next we'll talk about the small intestine. Small intestine is a long tubular organ that goes all the way from the pyloric sphincter of the stomach all the way down to the first part of the large intestine. Now the small intestine will complete the digestion of chyme, the absorption of products, and transports what's left over to the large intestine. This is probably the most important part of the whole digestive system, is the small intestine. This is where materials get absorbed by the body. And the small intestine has three components to it: the duodenum, or duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Here's the stomach up here. The first part is the duodenum, and the next part would be the jejunum, and the last part would be the ileum. And the ileum will join up to the large intestine here. Alright, the large intestine, it's only called large because it's wider than the small intestine. It's not longer at all. It is much shorter relative to the small intestine. There are various parts of the large intestine. The first part is called the cecum. This is where you'll find the appendix. So going back to this image here, where the ileum of the small intestine meets the large intestine, this first part is the cecum. And here's where you'll find the appendix, right there. Alright, after the cecum, you have various parts of what's called the colon. The word colon is always a reference to the large intestine. And the name of that segment of colon tells you in what direction the material is traveling. So you have the ascending colon, where material is passing upward. Ascending means to go up. Then you have the transverse colon. It extends from right to left. Descending colon, where material is moving downward. And then you have the sigmoid colon, where it's actually shaped kind of like an S. Alright, the last portion of the digestive tube is the rectum. And then the last 3 to 4 centimeters of the large intestine is the anal canal. And then the opening to the external environment is the anus. Okay, so here's the large intestine all together. The first part here, the cecum, where the appendix is, right there. From here, the material that's being processed will move upward, ascending colon here, because you're going up. Then it goes this way, the transverse colon. It'll start to go down, descending colon. Then from here you get to the S-shaped part of it, the sigmoid colon. And then the rectum. And then the last 3 to 4 centimeters, the anal canal. And the opening here at the very bottom of the picture would be the anus. So whenever someone has a sigmoidoscope used, that camera, that scope is put into the sigmoid colon here. If you are getting a colonoscopy, that camera or that scope is going all the way up here, which requires more sedation needed. Alright, the functions of the large intestine. The large intestine really has little to no digestive function at all, really. Its main function is to absorb water and electrolytes. If it absorbs too much, then you're going to be constipated. If it absorbs too little, then you're going to have diarrhea. The large intestines also where you'll find all the naturally occurring bacteria in your intestines, what are called intestinal flora. And of course, the main function here is to form feces and carry out defecation. Of course, we can't talk about this chapter and not talk about feces. Feces are composed of materials that the body has not digested or absorbed. So whatever your body can't use is what's left over when you go to the bathroom. In feces, you'll find electrolytes, bacteria, mucus, and water. And the bile pigments that are altered by the bacteria found in the colon are what provide the color to feces. You can get a good amount of information on someone's overall health just by looking at their feces. The color, the shape, the texture, all indicate what's going on with them metabolically. Alright, next we'll move on to the body metabolism. First we'll talk about nutrients. Of course, the body requires fuel as well as other materials to help develop and grow and heal. Nutrients are the chemical substances that are supplied by the food that you eat that are required for survival. There are two major classes of nutrients, macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients, the prefix micro means large, so these are what are needed in bulk. So lipids, carbohydrates, proteins. The things that you need a lot of are macronutrients. The opposite of that would be micronutrients. Micro means small, so these are only needed in small amounts, including vitamins and minerals. Now there are nutrients that your body needs, but this can't make on its own. They have to get it through your diet. These are called essential nutrients. And so these essential nutrients can include essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, and so on. But the key thing with those are your body needs it, but can't make it on its own. The only way your body can get those essential nutrients are through your diet. Alright, one thing I did want to cover briefly, because this is a term that is misused quite often, because people just don't understand what they're referencing, really. When we talk about the formal definition of a calorie is a term that's used in biology and physics and chemistry, but its real definition is the amount of heat that is required to raise a gram of water 1 degree Celsius. So a calorie is a unit of heat. But when you talk about the calories that are found in food, what you're actually talking about are kilocalories, or 1,000 regular calories. So when you're referencing calories in food, you can either say food calories or reference it as calorie with a capital C. Alright, vitamins. These are organic compounds other than carbohydrates and lipids and proteins that are required for normal metabolic processes. These are only required in very small amounts, and vitamins cannot be synthesized by the body in any real adequate level. You need to get these from your diet. Minerals. These are inorganic elements that are essential to human metabolism. Some major minerals include calcium, phosphorus, potassium. A lot of people will use the terms vitamins and minerals interchangeably, and they are nowhere near the same thing. Vitamins are organic compounds, minerals are inorganic compounds. So they are very, very different. That will bring us to the end of Chapter 14, the digestive system and body metabolism. And like always, if you have any questions, please contact me.